so on a product that is not in itself the raw steel and aluminium product, but on the product that is produced from those, is a real danger to us, and that's why we're taking that so seriously. We have an ambitious commitment to the EU reset. We need a partner on the other side, and there's been some political relative instability in some key European partners, and they've got to be in a position to have that conversation. But I say again, this is not a choice between the US and the EU. We can tackle this together. We can improve our trading relationship with both partners, and with India, and with the Gulf, and with other parts of the world. And that is the commitment of this government to do so.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In January 2017, the then Conservative Foreign Secretary claimed that the UK would be first in line for a US trade deal. 2,722 days later, when the Conservatives left office, precisely nothing had been achieved. Incidentally, that's 37 times longer than the 73 days that President Trump has been in power for his second term. So does the Business Secretary agree with me that it's hard to take the party opposite's criticisms of our trade approach seriously, given their appalling record on their claims of being able to achieve trade deals? And can I urge him to continue the calm approach with which he is approaching this in the interests of businesses across the country, in Basingstoke, and take those decisions in the national interest?
Grateful to my honourable friend for his support and the words that he has said. That there was no real progress on a federal level with the US under the previous government. The former president did have a decision he wouldn't pursue trade deals, so there wasn't perhaps much they could do on that. But I do sometimes reflect that the Conservative government broke our relationship with our nearest and most important trading partner, which is the European Union. It then fell out with countries in the Gulf who couldn't do that deal. It couldn't do the deal with India. It wouldn't engage with China. For a global Britain policy, there's not much of the globe left if you find yourself in that position. So not really best practice for us to follow, but we welcome the support for our approach if it exists on the other side, and continue to say this is surely the right way forward for all of our constituents.
John Lamont.
Thank you very much. Farming, textiles and whisky are all important parts of the economy in the Scottish borders, but also more broadly across Scotland, and will be affected by these tariffs. But there are also very real concerns in Scotland that products currently heading to the United States markets from other countries will be redirected and dumped into the UK market, which will impact the domestic market. So I wonder what action the Government is taking to address that, and will he undertake to engage with the National Farmers Union of Scotland, the Scottish Whisky Association and other representatives of industry in Scotland to ensure that this problem is tackled head-on?
I absolutely agree with him. This is one of the principal issues that we have to address, whether it's farming, whether it's textiles, whether it's whisky. The impact of what is going on in the rest of the world in their relationship to the US has a direct impact, even though it's not the conversation that relates directly to the conversation about tariffs and our own trade deal with the US. So I can tell him I'm meeting the Chair and Chief Executive of the Trade Remedies Authority imminently. This is a crucial part of the work we have to get right. We do have, for some of the existing announcements, particularly steel and aluminium, things already in place, but we've got to make sure we're ready for other sectors of the economy too.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents in North Warwickshire and Bedworth work at Jaguar Land Rover or in the motor manufacturing supply chain, and they are really concerned about 25% tariffs for exports to the US. Can the Secretary of State set out what steps he's taking to get these tariffs reduced and to support West Midlands businesses before I meet with Jaguar Land Rover later today? And does he agree with me that a calm and measured approach is exactly what is needed to get the best deal for British businesses?
Again, extremely grateful to my honourable friend for her question. JLR are an example of an incredible UK-based business in terms of their success in the US, but also in China and other parts of the world. We want to maintain that. We want to give them the platform they need for that success. And I can tell her I'm in personal, regular contact at the most senior levels with JLR. I'm delighted to hear she's meeting with them today to share some of these messages of reassurance. I know, like all businesses, they support, as we do, this calm, pragmatic, rational approach, seeking to find a better trade relationship with the US, to improve the relationship, not just to have and avoid the imposition of what was announced yesterday evening.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The previous government undertook secretive trade negotiations with the USA and included health in that. Could he assure the House that in any discussions of a bilateral nature with the USA, there will be no question of US private healthcare interests coming into Britain to undermine our National Health Service or indeed take over sections of our National Health Service?
Grateful for that question. That he knows I don't comment on the detail of talks, but I can tell him there have been no discussions in relation to the NHS or anything that would concern him in that regard. This is about goods and services and how we recognise each other's standards, but there's nothing relating to the health sector that I've been able to talk about with US counterparts. I hope he finds that a reassurance.
Chris Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The automotive industry is incredibly important for workers in Milton Keynes, with many headquarters based there, such as Volkswagen. I realise that these tariffs are going to be incredibly difficult for the automotive sector, and it's good to hear what he said about looking for a pragmatic approach to the Z mandate. Can he also let us know what else he's going to be doing in order to support the automotive industry here in the UK?
Well, I thank him for his question and his support. He has some tremendous businesses based in his area. It's great having him here as a champion for them, particularly around the automotive sector. Look, it is about the regulatory environment which we have discussed. It's about the funding that we make available for co-investment with the private sector, which is always a priority. £2 billion allocated for that in the budget. We've got to accelerate and improve our electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I think it's £300 million in the budget in relation to that. And look, the pressures on automotive across Europe are very, very fierce. I think that is widely recognised. Changes in consumer demand, much more competition from China coming in to the market around that. So we've got to make sure that we are serious about making sure the UK is the place to be a producer of automotive vehicles. My personal commitment to that is very, very strong, and I thank him for his question.
Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister, Secretary of State for his response so far and his statement on Northern Ireland. I trust that he will be continuing to engage with my colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive in the days ahead. However, I have some real concerns that you have not been able to allay my fears around the inclusion or the possible inclusion of online safety within any possible USD. Will the Secretary of State be able to reassure me and the Molly Rose Foundation that no more young lives will be sacrificed in order to try and get a deal with the US?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for a question in reference to Northern Ireland. As I said, I updated the First Minister and Deputy First Minister yesterday. It is a particular situation that we need to remain very much aligned of and to, and making sure the system is working as it should, difficult as that will be. She knows I'm not going into the specific negotiations of any part of a deal, but I seriously say to any colleague, I believe their concerns are misplaced if they think this is what a negotiation is about. It's about goods and services and regulation, and that is what we're focused on delivering.
Sally Jameson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister has rightly said that this Labour government will always work in the national interest. So can the Secretary of State assure the House that it is in our national interest to protect the copyright of our creative industries and £126 billion of economic power they bring to Great Britain?
Grateful for that question. The creative industries are not just a wonderful cultural asset to the UK, they're a tremendous economic asset as well. I don't necessarily agree with some of the commentary we recognise, the economic impact on the UK of our creative sector, the cultural soft power that comes from that, and the huge asset that it represents. That's always first and foremost in our thoughts.
Dr Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is estimated that 25,000 jobs directly linked to the automotive sector are at risk due to the reduced exports to the United States. That is a deep concern to many of my constituents who work at either JLR in Solihull or Aston Martin in Gaydon. With that in mind, can the Secretary of State set out what specific steps he's taking to protect those jobs and whether it will involve reforming the regulatory environment in which they operate in?
I've seen I think it references the IPPR report with that figure in, and of course, because the automotive sector is such a jewel in our crown, we were all aware of what would happen if we were not able to find a way through that. So our work to find that deal, to remove this threat of tariffs, is precisely in order to deliver that. I actually met with Aston Martin yesterday as an example of the work we're trying to do. He asks a specific question about that regulatory environment that we inherited. I can't preempt the publication of the consultation, but it has just finished. But I think he's aware of comments I've made publicly about the recognition of changing that to reflect different circumstances. He won't have to wait very long for the outcome to be published of that, and I can tell him myself, the Secretary of State for Transport, the Energy Secretary, Net Zero Secretary, are all aligned on making sure we get this regulatory environment correct for the future.
Liam Conlon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State and his colleagues for the practical and pragmatic approach they have taken to put us in the best possible position with the US. Does he agree with me that, as well as the US, political and economic cooperation with our European friends and neighbours is also essential and in our best interests?
It absolutely is, and as I say, there's no tension between those two things. It's a false choice if people try and present it in that way, and I'm particularly looking forward to some of the progress I hope we'll make in our relationship with the European Union. It's not looking to the past, it's looking to the future, and of course it's in both of our interests to do so.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The US is clearly seeking concessions from the UK, and it has been widely speculated that the UK government is considering a reduction in the digital services tax as a way of placating Trump and his ally Elon Musk. My honourable friend, the member for St Albans, asked the Secretary of State, but I didn't quite catch an answer in his response. So will the Secretary of State commit today not to cut the digital services tax, as it's the way the tech giants pay their fair share here in the UK?
Yeah. Well, she's heard me say repeatedly that I'm not going to go into the specific negotiations, but making sure any tech company, not just a US tech company, any tech company pays a fair rate of taxation in the UK for the economic activity that they have in the UK is something all parts of the British government are committed to, and she doesn't need to be worried about that. I would just say, look, there's always going to be, in any discussion, a lot of issues that need to be dealt with. And in the main, those are trade issues. I understand there's all kinds of speculation. Speculation isn't always correct. And I would just ask all colleagues to bear that in mind. Understand we can't publicly, in negotiation like this, share every single aspect of it. But if she's worried about US companies or any tech companies paying the right rate of tax in the UK, I can tell that's something we're deeply committed to.
Dean. Oh. Oh my goodness. Costigan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that now is the time for unity across the chamber in the national interest? And in contrast to the politicking we had earlier from the Conservative Shadow Minister, will he commit that this Labour government will always put country first, party second?
Yeah. Absolutely, country first, and I would hope all members of the House could get behind the approach that we are taking. It is genuinely in the national interest. It is the way forward. It is the way to deliver what all of our constituents want in these troubling times, a much better path towards the future.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I appreciate the tone of concern that the Secretary of State has come here with today. I'm particularly concerned what this means for the UK defence industry. In particular, those companies such as BAE Systems in Fylde and across Lancashire that manufacture component parts for US-UK defence programmes such as the F-35. So as the Secretary of State, two things. Firstly, what conversations has he had with the Ministry of Defence to work with their counterparts in the US to address this from a national security perspective for both the US and UK? And also, can he give assurance that the order of fighter jets, 25 fighter jets that the RAF needs to place will not be used as a bargaining chip in any trade deal, and that British-built Typhoon jets will be used for the RAF?
Well, I thank him for his question. I myself have constituency interests very similar to his, and the close alignment between ourselves and the US on defence and security matters is an enduring and huge asset to both countries, and I absolutely share the sentiments that he has raised in the chamber today. He asked about whether we can engage US counterparts in this conversation about a more constructive way forward. Yes, that is always part of our thinking. Actually, our trade bodies in the UK have excellent US links in the main, and they engage in similar activity around that. He raised a specific point. I've no detail I can give him, but I've no knowledge of anything like that being used as a bargaining chip. But if I need to give him additional information, I'm happy to write to him to provide that.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Bracknell is home to the UK and European headquarters of many US companies, as well as many UK businesses who do business in America. Can the Secretary of State assure businesses in Bracknell that it's the position of this government that barriers to trade are bad for growth on both sides of the Atlantic, and that he's working hard with a cool head to secure a trade deal?
Well, I thank him for that question. He's right, Bracknell is got some tremendous businesses. I think Honeywell and Dell and 3 So he will have some particular constituency interests that he is seeking to promote and to defend. I would say the approach that we have mapped out, that I've mapped out in the Chamber today, is not just one that I've had tremendous support from UK businesses on, but actually from US businesses as well, particularly ones with a relationship, an economic relationship to the UK. And I think what people are seeking right now is some evidence that countries around the world are trying to deal with this difficult situation in the right way, in their own national interest, but in a way that gives us an opportunity to actually strengthen rather than weaken these important trading relationships.
Ellie Chance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's clear that the UK needs to show some backbone in standing up to the US President's bully boy tactics on trade. Now, the Secretary of State says that he's keen to negotiate a deal, but at what cost? What is he putting on the table? Can he assure the House today that in seeking a carve-out from President Trump's tariffs, he's not prepared to offer President Trump and his big tech billionaire buddies an opportunity to carve up the NHS, our environmental and food standards, or our sovereign right to make our own decisions on taxing digital giants?
Yes.
She will have heard the answers I've given to some of the questions that she raised and the unequivocal assurances I've been able to provide. She talks about backbone and strength. You know, strength and wisdom are not opposing values. Backbone comes from putting your own national interest first and negotiating on a basis that is in the interest of all of our constituents, not banding around rhetoric and escalating the situation. That, respectfully, is not the right way forward. The right way forward is to engage on national interest and to make sure we're delivering and have the chance to find the right way through this.
Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and let me thank the Secretary of State and his team for the enormous amounts of hard work they've been putting in on this issue. And it feels apt to mention that I represent the town of Kirkcaldy, the birthplace of Adam Smith, who I'm sure would have had something to say about last night's events. I know my right honourable friend is keenly aware of the importance of the US market for Scottish exports, including but not limited to salmon and whisky, which I know he is very fond of. And I wonder what further reassurance he could offer to Scotland's leading export industries about the impact of these developments on trade with the US.
Well, I'm tremendously grateful for her support and for her question. I think Adam Smith's probably the best historical reference we've had in the debate so far today in this statement. Look, she knows I've always aspired for my department to be one of the most pro-Scottish UK ministries because of the interests that we are there to defend and to promote. She will also know it's actually Tartan Week this week in the US. The Secretary of State for Scotland is in the US right now. I love the way, I really admire the way he has turned the Scottish Office into such an economically focused department, working with Scottish businesses, working very closely with me, and that's, I think, a tremendous initiative and one that we'll continue to promote.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trump's tariffs will make everyone poorer, and they're extremely disappointing. And isn't it noteworthy that members from Reform haven't bothered to turn up to share in our disappointment? Our automotive sector is already announcing closures and layoffs, including in Stellantis in Luton, which has provided great jobs for my constituents for many, many years. In his review of the regulatory environment in response to these tariffs, will the Secretary of State ensure that it will be easier, not harder, to create jobs in the UK in the future?
I thank him for that question. He's right to note some conspicuous absences from the Chamber today on such an important subject. Look, I think I couldn't make it clearer. I care a great deal about not just the transition to new technologies in terms of the automotive sector, but making sure we make those vehicles in the UK. And we face some tremendous competitive pressures. He will know that from the stories his own constituents will tell him. So we've got to be alert to that. We've got to be willing to be adaptable to make sure we are a place where vehicles can be made, because we have some tremendous industries, we have some tremendous, if you chart our productivity, our efficiency of some of our plants on a global scale, we're at the top end. So we've got to get that policy and regulatory environment right, and I can give him a total assurance that is my personal objective.
Joanna Baxter.
Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and all the work that he has done so far in negotiating an economic partnership with the United States. I know he will appreciate that the lower levy applied to the UK will be of cold comfort to my constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South, who will see their bills rise. Can he assure me that he will resist calls for knee-jerk reaction to this because escalation of a trade war won't help anybody, and the way you achieve a negotiated settlement is through constructive dialogue and a calm approach. I say that as somebody who spent 20-odd years as a negotiator prior to entering this House.
I've seen my old friend negotiate firsthand, and she's a formidable negotiator. I might see if she's available, actually, for some of the work we've got to do. But she's absolutely right to say this is about delivering for our constituents. They will be concerned. They've got to be when something of this magnitude has been announced. And no one in government, or I think on any part of the chamber today, is relaxed about the relatively better position we find ourselves in, because it's still something we've got to find a way through. We do need to keep all options on the table. That is behind some of the announcements I've made in this statement today. But the approach that she is advocating and promoting is my approach, and I thank her for her support.
Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the Secretary of State. I watched him on TV this morning. Calm, collected and carefully chosen words, I have to say. While I have real concerns for Northern Ireland business, he understands that. So the Honourable Member understands that. Indeed, my stomach's doing somersaults just worrying about the impact for Northern Ireland. My party leader's point of PMQ still stands. Northern Ireland remains exposed to potential EU retaliation, and local businesses must not become collateral damage. The government must take, I believe, urgent steps to protect Northern Ireland interests and to ensure that our place in the United Kingdom internal market is fully safeguarded. The Prime Minister very kindly yesterday, in his reply to the Right Honourable Member for East Belfast, committed to act in our national interests. So can the Secretary of State today, just for the record, in this House, on this statement, outline what steps will be taken to do just that? Thank you so much.
I thank him for his question and for his kind words. It has been quite a week so far, with still some time to go. But particularly in relation to Northern Ireland, I do think this is an issue not just for Northern Ireland members, but for all members of the House. We've got to be alert to the particular situation that would occur in the occurrence of a different retaliatory stance from ourselves and the EU. And that is something, that's why I briefed the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and my counterpart yesterday. Particularly, I think the Shadow Minister was right to say the issues around the duty reimbursement scheme are key in this area. When we talk about the formal steps that we have taken, where businesses can now input directly to government about their concerns that they will have and what it will mean for them, we need to work together, particularly in relation to Northern Ireland, to make sure that specific voice, that specific question, is a key part of how we look at this and respond. And I'd be willing to work with him, keen to work with him in that regard.
Ben Coleman.
Speaker. And may I echo the thanks both to my right honourable friend and also to the Prime Minister for the calm and effective way that they're dealing with the United States. Does he agree that, unlike some of the frivolous comments we've had from Conservative benches opposite, that the US 20% tariff on EU goods is to be deeply regretted, as it could indirectly affect those many UK businesses that supply components to EU manufacturers who export to the US, particularly in the automotive and the aerospace and the pharmaceutical sectors? So can he tell us what discussions he has had with European counterparts about the US decision, and how he will represent our concerns to them in coming days if there's an escalation of tariffs?
Well, absolutely. He is absolutely right to say that our concerns have got to be not just in terms of what this means for our own relationship to the United States, but what it means for the second-order impacts on the UK from the trading relationship changing between the US and other key allies and markets. No discussion on trade or tariffs is complete without bringing up rules of origin, and of course the complexities of some of the supply chains, particularly in automotive, as he says, are key issues, because you have to make sure not only that you have preferential tariff access to markets, but your products that you make in your country qualify for those through those rules of origin. I can tell him we're closely engaged with all partners. He will know my colleague, the Cabinet Office Minister, deals with the EU reset, but we have a very close working relationship and will continue to do so, as well as having direct conversations with our Commission counterparts.
Dean.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in answers to questions so far, the Secretary of State seems to dismiss the threat of US trade negotiations to the safety of our children. I'm sure he has seen the abandonment of content moderation on these platforms. I'm sure he's heard what Trump, JD Vance and Musk have said about free speech in our country. What they mean is the freedom of these US social media giants to keep our children addicted to their platforms, no matter how harmful that content is. Now, I know that he said he doesn't want to get into the specifics of the negotiations, but does that mean that the Online Safety Act is a part of the negotiations, or will he take the opportunity now to rule that part out?
I'm just very, very clear with colleagues not to invent problems that don't exist. I'm aware of comments that have been made about freedom of speech in the UK. They've not been part of the trade negotiations. He asks me to recognise I can't share the details of negotiations and then share details of the negotiations, and he knows I'm not going to do that. That wouldn't be in our national interest to share them. But I would just say to colleagues, this is about goods and services in the main, and I think that is a really important thing to focus on. Let's not make this more difficult than it is.
West Bromwich is a metal industry heartland. We are home to the Confederation of British Metal Forming and many brilliant exporting businesses that are in the automotive, steel and aluminium supply chain. This morning I spoke to the Chief Executive of William King, one of those brilliant local businesses, and she was clear that the government is right to remain calm and to work to achieve a deal. But while ministers are working towards that deal, can I ask what else we can do to support these businesses to continue to trade and invest with confidence?
Yeah. That is absolutely the right approach to take, and I welcome her support from her businesses in her constituency, as she has outlined. Of course, we're trying to find a way through this, but look, our domestic competitiveness, the situation we inherited after the election, it's not what it could be, it's not what it needs to be. Even I think Conservative members recognise the impact of some aspects of regulation, of energy prices, of the direction of travel. I mean, a lot of the foundation industries, the output last year, this year, is at levels that should concern us all. So we've got to get that right. That's why this government is committed to an industrial strategy. It's why we're committed to a trade strategy that works in partnership with that. The feedback we get from businesses is that this is exactly what they want, as well as, of course, endorsing this approach, as she has said. And I want West Bromwich, which is a powerhouse, to be an even bigger powerhouse in the future, and that applies to many members' constituencies across this House.
Manuela Patriella.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The tariffs announced by Trump last night will be concerning for many businesses in the UK, not least British farmers, including in my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon. And we all recognise that Trump will use the imposition of tariffs to try to get concessions from countries around the world. Will the Business Secretary commit today and reassure the whole country that he will not agree to any deal with the US which would lower food standards and undermine British farmers?
Well, she will have heard me say very clearly about our SPS regime and our commitment to that on this side of the House, which we included in our manifesto. I would also say that the UK is currently the biggest importer in Europe of US agriculture. So we shouldn't present this as something that we don't currently have, that the US is trying to open up. We have a strong relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship, and British agricultural products are themselves a premium product that has a tremendous reputation, whether it's in the US or in other parts of the world. And seeking to remove trade barriers on both sides of that whilst maintaining that SPS regime in the UK, and because that's very important for our other trading relationships, is vitally important. But it could be a story, a positive story, of how we open up more markets to excellent US products, and that is fundamentally what good trade policy is about.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for coming here and his really calm head in a difficult situation. My constituency of Harlow is home to many businesses like Wright's Flowers, A1 Bacon, Harlow Group and Raytheon, who rely on international trade both directly and indirectly with the US. What reassurance can the Secretary of State give those businesses and their consumers? And does he think the work that Raytheon are doing to actually source UK parts for their defence system is going to be more and more vital in the years and months to come?
To him for his support and for mentioning some of the excellent local businesses in his area. In relation to the specific example that he gave, I think particularly the impact after the pandemic, after the war in Ukraine, of supply chains, how the private sector is working with government to look at some of those vulnerabilities, to look at where we can make sure we don't have strategic weaknesses. I think all of that work is vitally important. Our intention is to include that in the publication of the trade strategy, which is due fairly imminently, but this aspect of economic security is a vital and important area.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State can't have failed to notice the number of members from all sides of the House who have raised the issue of the food and drink industry, particularly in Scotland, much of it produced in my constituency. Now, I do admire in his statement his speaking softly and carrying a big stick approach as he prepares his plan B, as it were. But retaliatory action is not the only lever that he could pull, and I would encourage him, and perhaps he might want to comment on whether in discussions with the Chancellor they might be prepared to offer some sort of mitigation to these industries in the autumn statement. Thank you.
Well, it's very skillfully done to raise issues that are more for the Chancellor than myself in the autumn statement. But look, I think the prominence of food and drink because of our success in this area, because of what it means to every bit of the United Kingdom, because that is such a prominent part of our economic exports and our prosperity and our success. Of course, that features very heavily in all of our decisions, whether that's in trade, whether that's in business support, export support, or whether that's in the wider policy environment, the regulatory environment. So I can assure him that his constituents and his excellent and successful businesses in his area are always prominent in our thinking.
Smith.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his hard work and for his calm and pragmatic approach. In my constituency of Aylesbury, there are almost 5,000 small and medium-sized businesses, several of which export to the US or have been seeking to do so. Can the Secretary of State set out what he's doing to protect our SMEs in his ongoing negotiations with the Trump administration?
And look, fundamentally, what I want to see is greater market access to the US for small and medium-sized businesses in every part of the UK. There are particular things that we could tackle as part of that, the regulatory system in the United States, the federal-state dichotomy, particularly for services, exports, and all of that, I think, is the prize on offer if we get this right. There's also a big part of trade policy, which is not just free trade agreements, even though they tend to get the most prominence, but how we come to agreement in terms of e-commerce, how we look at some functions of online marketplaces and transactions. All of that is a sort of very practical difference that you can make through good trade policy to small and medium-sized businesses, and that's going to be, again, a premium and important part of the trade policy we're about to publish.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The pharmaceutical sector appears to have temporarily avoided tariffs for now, but that may well change. However, medical devices and diagnostics do not appear to have that same exemption. The UK is home to many medtech and diagnostic companies, and these tariffs will have an impact on them both here and abroad, and may well push up prices. So I wonder what conversations the Secretary of State is having with colleagues in DHSE about ensuring access to medtech and diagnostics in the face of increasing prices.
Thankful for his question. He may be aware of the biopharma conference that was held in the UK yesterday with the top CEOs of many of the leading companies in this area, that was attended by myself, the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Health and the Secretary of State for Science and Innovation. So he's right to say, I think we will perhaps potentially see further announcements in this area. There are particular US issues that come to the differential in drug pricing, for instance, which has always been a fairly prominent part of trade negotiations. But the integration and the shared aspirations between people in government like myself or the Health Secretary, where there is an absolute recognition of our need to be more forward-leaning, to use more innovation, to look at how we provide that and relative allocation of resources in our existing health system. That is something that we take very seriously, that we're looking at very much. There's a lot to do. It's a difficult situation, but we need more of the success that he's outlined.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his urgent statement. The announcement of a 10% tariff on all products exported from the UK to the United States means that the Scots whisky industry, for the second time in just 5 years, could once again be impacted by tariffs in the industry's largest global market. This will be concerning news across communities where Scotch whisky is a major employer, including my constituency of Western Bartonshire. Scotch whisky is a quarter of all Scottish exports to the US, but it's not one-way traffic. For instance, the Scotch whisky industry imports up to $300 million of ex-bourbon casks every year, just for one example. Can I urge the Secretary of State to work with the US administration and ensure a mutually beneficial resolution can be agreed as soon as possible to support the Scotch whisky industry?
Well, I'm incredibly grateful to him for his questions and his accurate insight into some of the codependencies and relationships that exist between Scotch whisky and other key international sectors of the food and drink economy. I can tell him, if he ever wants to come and see me in my office in the Old Admiralty, in the Secretary of State's office, I keep a bottle of Lagavulin in there. Excellent choice, I think we can all agree on. You'd be welcome yourself, Madam Deputy Speaker, at any time to come for that conversation. We've got to keep the numbers down, but perhaps we'll look at that if we come through with a deal. But it is an absolute premium, but of course the Shadow Minister will be very, very welcome to come in. What an excellent meeting we've just set up there accidentally. But the kind of point that he makes, that because often in some markets, there's an equivalence made between, for instance, say the tariff on bourbon from the US and Scotch whisky, and the comparison that is made, and those are often seen as competing products. But there is an interdependency there as well. It's a really important, a fascinating point, the sherry barrels issue as well. I can also say to him that we are in regular contact with the Scotch Whisky Association. They're tremendously supportive as a resource to us, very closely engaged with government. So again, these issues which are so important to his constituency are always considered and prominent at the highest levels of government.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement and congratulate him on his choice of whisky. It's my favourite as well. So there's no winners in this situation, you know, particularly when you think of people waking up this morning in Vietnam, Cambodia, etc. It's absolutely dire situation. But nonetheless, I mean, I do have to acknowledge, I think the cool heads in the government mean that people in Edinburgh South West, their jobs have been saved, at least for now, as we start this process. But I don't doubt as we speak, businesses in my constituency and right across the UK are trying to figure out what this means for them. So I do think we have to really redouble our efforts in terms of our search for growth. So I really do welcome the pragmatic words given around the zero-emission vehicle mandate. Ultimately, I think, without compromising our aims, we can work together with businesses and trade unions and get a better outcome. But I do wonder if the same approach can be taken elsewhere. You know, and what comes to mind is, of course, the AI regulations we've been discussing, I think were mentioned earlier. Very quickly, Madam Deputy Speaker, HSS advertising and also sustainable aviation fuel mandate as well. I think all these things we don't need to compromise, but we can work closer with industry to get the right outcome.
I very much warmly welcome his words and his endorsement and seconding of my whisky choice. Other excellent whiskies are available, I think we should say that. We've got a lot of Scottish members present today and don't want to offend anyone as part of that. He is right to say businesses will need reassurance. I hope they will see that from the tone the government is striking today, but they'll need information. If members get out their phones and go on great.gov.uk, they'll see a link to a bespoke page where that information is being provided and that we have advertised around it. He makes a point I think is very important, which is where we can look at alleviating some of the domestic pressures, whether that's through regulation, whether that's through other areas. This is clearly the time to do so. I can tell him I've had those conversations with Cabinet colleagues. I think he is right to say it's not about perhaps changing policy, but just looking at the impact right now, how we can make a difference. I think that's a very wise observation to make.
Andrew Lewin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend my right honourable friend on the measured tone that he has taken to events in Washington, but want to reflect on the agency we do have here in London and with our allies in Brussels. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that now is the moment to seek the most ambitious trade deal we possibly can with the European Union, seeking deep alignment in goods and services? And furthermore, whilst the United States may want to make it harder to trade, does he agree with me that the UK-EU reset provides us an opportunity to break down the barriers to trade that the party opposite put up when they were in government? And if we get this right, the prize on offer from the UK-EU trading deal can be even greater than what's been lost overnight.
I warmly thank him for his question, his support for the approach that we are taking. I do believe there is a competitive advantage to seek for the UK, where we're able to reach agreement with the US, we're able to do those trade deals, those negotiations we have with countries like India or customs unions like the GCC, and also get the EU reset right. It isn't about looking to the past, but look, a lot of smaller businesses did stop exporting entirely after Brexit. They probably almost certainly set up subsidiaries in the single market. That was not to our advantage. We saw a real decline in certain types of food and drink trade, even though we've got still the same broadly similar SPS regime in place. So we can work on these practical things, and that is our objective. I think there is a real gain to be had from that. We need a partner on the other side who sees the benefits as well, but I believe that does exist, and that is a crucial bit of focus for what we call the twin track approach to trade under this government.
Jonathan Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and the work that he's doing as we face this challenge. I also welcome the government's commitment to increase defence spending. It's not just good for our national security, it's good for our economy too, and the sector employs many people in Derbyshire, including at Rolls-Royce. So as we seek a trade deal which will create the economic conditions for our public services to thrive and for our prices and bills to remain as low as possible, can I encourage the Secretary of State to remind the US of the importance of manufacturers such as Rolls-Royce and the defence sector, the strategic and economic partnerships that they offer us, so that we can work together more constructively with them?
Those are very wise words, and I'm grateful to him for putting them on the record today. Defence spending is crucial to our national security. The big change, the big uplift that we've seen is a key part of that. But he's right to say it would be wrong for anyone in this country to think there's not a domestic economic dividend for that. And those jobs are spread all around the United Kingdom, including in places where they're really reliant upon them. So it's great news on the economic front for all parts of the UK, and Derbyshire and Rolls-Royce, example of that. He talks about how we can get this right with our relationship to the US. Look, there are some great things we already have underway. If you think of the AUKUS agreement, where the US treats domestic UK suppliers as part of the domestic supply chain, there's equivalence there. If we think about, for instance, on steel, the role that Sheffield Forgemasters plays as a crucial part of the defence supply chain, again for the US. These are really important strengths to recognise, mutually beneficial strengths to recognise. And again, I think if you look at the facts and how our trade and interdependencies work, there's a great prize on offer to get this right.
Final question, David Pinto-Dudzinski.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A joy as ever. And I would like to thank my right honourable friend and the Prime Minister for their tireless efforts that have secured the best comparable position available to our country. There is, of course, deep disappointment that tariffs have been levied, but the fact they've been levied at the lowest band is a vindication of their strategy. And businesses that I have spoken to in Hendon and nationally have been unanimous in their support for the government's approach. Does he agree with me that the best way to stand up for Britain is through a cool, calm and collected and pragmatic approach, and that we must reject the knee-jerk response and calls for action on invented problems that some on the benches opposite demand?
Extremely grateful to him for his question. He has absolutely articulated our approach, which is that we are not complacent, we're not happy, we are disappointed with any tariffs being imposed on the UK. We recognise the lowest band being applied to the UK, but it doesn't mean we won't redouble our efforts to secure the kind of agreement which offers a way through that. I'm grateful to hear the support from his constituents. That is what I hear in every part of the country. Genuinely, this is the approach that business wants us to take. It is calm. I'm not sure if it's cool, but it is calm, and it is, I hope, reassuring to businesses in his area. And where a lot of people are always offering advice in this area, are always at times offering to escalate a conflict to a point which they perhaps haven't got a plan to de-escalate from. This government's approach is always to be pursuing our national interest, to be working with partners, to be looking at the mutual reciprocal benefits we could get from doing this right. And I am extremely grateful for the level of support across all parts of the House towards this policy. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
That is the end of a very lengthy statement on UK-US trade and tariffs. I'm now going to move on to the Select Committee statement. If the ministers on the front bench wish to leave or they're planning to stay, I'll